Can a family of 4 comfortably live on $3,500 US per month in the beautiful paradise country of Nicaragua? That's the question we're going to be attempting to answer today. Before we dive into that, I want to preface this that everyone has a different concept of what comfortable is. We're going to do our best to kind of contextualize this because easily one person needs, ocean views and a mansion and all kinds of, 8 cars, and another person needs to just keep the rain off of their heads and manage to feed their children. So there's this wide chasm as to what people consider to be comfort, but I think we can come up with a reasonable middle ground, and we'll explain what that is and come up with a budget so we have an idea of what $3,500 could look like for a family of 4 attempting to live on that here in Nicaragua. So let's get to that right after the bump. I love getting heated discussions on my channel because it gives me a reason and the energy to go make a video. And in this case, the person I was speaking to asked me to make a video as I was setting up the camera. So how perfect is that? It's exactly what they wanted. It's exactly what I wanted. Everyone wins. Let's dive into these numbers. $3,500 is not a lot of money. Obviously, we're not talking about a massive budget. So this is going to be a little bit challenging for the person who's looking at doing this. And technically, they asked me if a budget of $2,800 to $3,500 per month would be doable. Now, $2,800 certainly I think is getting pretty lean, but people will definitely jump in and say, no, it's completely doable. For some reference, there are people on my channel who report that they are living, it doesn't mean that they have to, but they are living at $800 per month. I've had more than one person talk about that, and they have their own house, not that they necessarily own, but they have a private house, and they're able to get around and they're able to do things, they're able to go out to eat, they're able to, live their lives pretty well, and so that's an important starting point. $800 for 2 people would be $1,600, for 4 would be $3,200. Now, obviously, you're sharing some costs, and that's one of the reasons why $3,500 works pretty well. You can't extrapolate what it would take for a single person. Living as a single person below about $1,500 per month is pretty difficult, but clearly doable if people are doing it at $800. And it's important to understand that to a Nicaraguan living at Nicaraguan standards with Nicaraguan resources, $800 is generally considered roughly the entry point, so meaning the lowest end of the middle class. As you move up from $800 to say $3,000 to $4,000 per month, this is taking you through the middle class numbers. Basically, you're able to have a house, you're able to have a car, you're able to go on vacation and actually travel, but you're not able to do a lot. Obviously, at $800, you have very little extra spending money, but you do have some. So $800 is roughly the number you're able to get if you speak English and are able to get into one of the foreign call centers. Those people are doing pretty well, and then you can generally move up from that, but that would be the entry point. That gives you kind of a line in the sand or a stake in the ground to work from, right? Now, let's start with the 800-pound gorilla, and that is your housing. The most difficult thing is always food. We're going to save that for the end. Housing is the biggest spot, and of course, with housing comes location. Location. This defines so much of your experience anywhere but in Nicaragua, for sure. So if you're looking at some places like San Juan del Sur, Granada, or possibly the nicer neighborhoods of Managua, you're going to be, under normal circumstances, looking at quite a bit higher prices than much of the country. All of these areas are viable within this budget, but those areas specifically will be much more expensive. So things like just going out to eat at any restaurant, harder. Just finding the first apartment that comes up, harder, and so forth. But they would be viable. You can just shop around harder and find deals. And I have people on the Expats WhatsApp group that are jumping in with what their numbers are in some of those towns, and they're completely doable. But let's look at some of these things. So first of all, we have lots of videos that show houses in different price ranges and different sizes. So you can watch many of those and get some ideas just here on the channel, right? We're not a real estate channel. We don't sell anything. So these are just prices we've been quoted. And remember, anytime we say, and we'll definitely say it on the show, if it's a price that someone is paying, we'll disclose that. If it's a price that someone is asking, we'll disclose that. If that's what they're asking, then it's always going to be that or lower. It doesn't mean you'll get lower, but normally you can, even if just a little bit. So if you see a house that they're asking $550, assume that you probably will get away at $525, maybe a lot less in some cases, but that little bit almost certainly. And if it's what someone is currently paying, chances are you'll be able to get that again because they're paying it. Someone would be happy to take you on, especially if you're willing to take on longer leases. Now, of course, we're assuming some things like you're going to be looking at a long-term lease and not short-term furnished leases, and that you will be spending a little bit of money up front to purchase your refrigerator, your oven, your microwave, and those things so that they don't become a monthly cost that you're leasing or renting from someone. It's pretty normal, but we just want to have these assumptions because when people move to a new country, there tends to be a lot of shaking up your thinking on things, and some people get a lot of assumptions that may make complete sense for them, but are not things that we would necessarily think of. If you asked me to move to Nicaragua and said, hey, you're going to move to Nicaragua, what are some of the first things you're going to do? I would just jump to, well, I'm going to find a long-term rental and I'm going to buy appliances. But some people will simply go, well, I need all those things. I don't want to buy them. I don't know what to do. I just want to rent, and not realize that that would be a massive impact to their cost and really change their cost of living. So just little things like that you need to be aware of. We have all the mental tools, I think, on this channel, but we have 4,000 videos, so there's a lot to go through. But there really is a lot of information that if you have that info of what things should cost or what people are doing, and then you know who to talk to or what questions to ask, and figure out how to get some of those prices under control. And like I just hinted at, we have a WhatsApp group that is called the Expats of Nicaragua. The link is in the show description if you want to join that. Obviously completely free. It's just a group where you can talk to people, but we got hundreds of people in there discussing expatting around Nicaragua. And that's a really good resource. Now, it's a lot of chatter, so mute it and don't be offended that they talk nonstop. But it is a good place where you can jump in and be like, hey, where do I buy peanut butter? The peanut butter is really expensive. And someone will be like, go to PriceMart, get this brand. It's going to save you a ton. Okay, great. Little things like that can go a long way to surviving well here in Nicaragua. Also, some quick housekeeping. Thursdays, we tried to do a live stream. We'd love it if you guys joined us. It's a great time to ask these kinds of questions. Things like, hey, what could I do for a budget? We could break that down in real time, and then you could give feedback as we go. So love it when people do that. That's great. If you'd like to send in a video question, all the information on how to do that is in the show notes. Love it when people do that. I love putting you guys on the show and having that interaction. Marcela from the show has stage 4 Hodgkin's lymphoma. We are doing a GoFundMe to raise money for her. I have missed sometimes putting that link into the show notes. I'm trying to get it all in there, but it's definitely in there for today. If you would be so inclined as to donate even just a little bit to help her with this challenge. She is a single mother with 2 kids living between 2 cities, going through her chemotherapy treatments. As I'm recording this, she just arrived after getting her 3rd treatment. She has many months left to go. And while her healthcare is covered, there's many other expenses that come with being a single working mother with 2 children and needing to deal with all their school stuff and such. And she is a really important resource for us. She does a lot of behind the scenes work here on the show to help us understand prices, get introduced to different people, have access to different places. She does a lot of the lubrication with businesses and organizations that we work with to get information for you guys. So she's very valuable here on the show, even when she's not in front of the camera. And sometimes she's the one operating the camera as well. So all of that. Okay. That's our housekeeping for the day. So when we're looking at houses, most of the houses we look at here on the show are here in León. Now, the person who asked this question initially did not specify what part of the country they were interested in or what type of living they would consider to be comfortable. There's just a family of 4, 2 adults and 2 children, and so we have to extrapolate a little bit from that to kind of get an idea of what we think might make sense. So we're just going to rule out some things from the beginning that would not necessarily make it impossible, but they would make it more difficult. We're going to assume they're not looking for beachfront. They may want to be near a beach, but not on a beach. They're not looking for mansions. They're not looking for the Beverly Hills of Nicaragua. They're not looking for anything like that. They're not trying to be in the village of San Juan del Sur, the big tourist center. That might be a great place for them, and absolutely you could make this budget work there. It would just all be much harder, and what is comfortable would the comfort in what is comfortable would more come from what is available in the community and less from what you're spending your money on. Meaning, your meals would be more expensive, your housing would be more expensive, all viable, again, but all those little things would cost a little bit more, but you'd have a larger community of expats directly around you that would be easier to just walk out your door and interact with than, say, if you were in a Chinandega, where you might be able to get all your housing and food cheaper. But if you want to interact with any other foreigners and just have resources for your kids, things that might be free, just community things, or getting to a park that they may want to go play, might be harder. All doable in all directions, but those are trade-offs that you would be making, and they could be very sensible ones, of course. If you really feel that it's important to have a large nearby community of English speakers who are also foreigners, especially for your kids, then having a place like Granada or San Juan del Sur, that is one of the reasons that those are more expensive locations. So that could completely make sense, but those are just things to consider. What we're going to be looking at here is primarily pricing here in Leon. Not because we're trying to cherry pick a low-cost place, but we're also trying to not cherry pick a high-cost one. I live here in Leon. A lot of people who watch my show are interested in this general area, and we've shown a lot of houses around all the different neighborhoods, or the major ones, of Leon. And these are pretty useful numbers. You can extrapolate that the majority of non-touristy Nicaragua is going to be relatively close, maybe within 5% the cost of here in Leon. And if you're looking at some high-cost places, obviously a downtown Granada is easily going to be double. That's pretty standard. But you could get into mostly any of the cities within 5 to 10% of the prices here in Leon. Even if you're looking at Managua, the big capital, when we're talking about prices in places like Castle Leon, which is one of the lowest cost modern developments here in Leon, those prices, when they translate over to Managua, is only about 25% higher. Always a call comes in while I'm trying to record. If it's not the dog, it's the phone. Okay, so if we're looking here in Leon, for a family of 4, we're going to make some assumptions. One is we're going to rule out the places that are 2 bedrooms, which is a lot of the market. So that's going to eliminate a lot of things. But we're trying to be comfortable here. So we're going to assume that we're going to have 1 room for the parents and 1 room for each child. If you need more rooms, you can kind of extrapolate from this. But we're assuming that you don't have to have a home office or workspace and that everyone wants their own room. Of course, you may be just fine with having 3 bedrooms, 1's an office, the kids share a room, whatever. What works for you. But we're going to assume at least 3 bedrooms. The cheapest, really comfortable 3-bedroom that I have found here in Leon over the last couple of years of searching is $350 per month. So when it comes to houses at 3 bedrooms, $200 is the absolute low end. And I don't think that most people are going to find what you find at that price range to be comfortable. So if that's our guideline, then no, that is going to be too low in all but the most extreme circumstances. Some people are just going to have no needs for their house and it'll be adequate. And some people, somebody is going to get an amazing deal for $200 and be like, wow, this is actually a really nice place. Those are extreme outliers. Now, I do have a friend who has a $200 house and she likes it quite a lot, but she's Nicaraguan and it is certainly functional. But it's relatively less than what most people consider for comfort. But it does have decent-sized rooms. You could do quite a bit to fix it up and make it a place you could live in. So in theory, the $200 is not completely out of consideration, but reasonably someone coming in with this kind of budget is going to be spending at least $300, I suspect $350, and up, with in the 400s, much more likely to be a place that they're going to find a good level of comfort. Now, if you watch my show, we showed a lot of houses in the mid-4s to the mid-5s that were extremely comfortable. Gated communities, very private, very high-end, still not quite American style, but edging towards that on the very high end of Nicaraguan. You still are going to get your good values, your good comfort by taking on some amount of stylistic and lifestyle changes to move to Nicaragua. If you're trying to recreate American lifestyles, you will be struggling a lot more. It's just how it's going to be. Certain things that Americans take for granted, such as central air or central hot water, those are things that are just not done here. And so if you want to do them, you're doing something unique and premium, whereas having an inline hot water heater just for the shower or kitchen, no problem. Wanting to have room-by-room AC with split units that are super efficient, no problem. So little adjustments can go a really long way. Now, here in Leon, a lot of our buildings are colonial, so you end up with a really quirky assortment of available houses, and that makes Leon, while it's less expensive than most of the country, a little bit more challenging than much of the country. But if you're looking at a Matagalpa, for example, you're going to have essentially no colonial homes because it was not a colonial city, so anything that's there is a recreation and affectation. And so you're more likely to find houses that, 1, don't need air conditioning because it's a much cooler climate, and 2, are built more around a more modern enclosed house approach, which may fit some people's lifestyles better. So there's adjustments to be made, but I think we can really reasonably look in this price range and say this is where things get very comfortable without having to really stretch. You can be in any of the cities and find houses in these price ranges. You can have lots of different styles. You're going to have lots of different options within the cities. And if someone was on a much tighter budget, I don't want to make it sound like it would be impossible, but we're starting to get into this really difficult niche if we try to get well below, say, $350. Then you're definitely into a serious struggle. And even at 500, finding homes in Nicaragua is hard, not because of the price not being available, just because finding homes is hard. The whole mechanism for encountering a home you may even hate is difficult, let alone finding one that you then love. So that's that creativity, that approaching the process with an open mind and saying, okay, I've got a world of options, but I got to figure out where and what and play with different ideas and see what's going to work for me and my family. That is very key. If you're going to the United States, you can presuppose nearly everything about your housing and lifestyle and village and so forth with great accuracy. In most cases, someone would get it wrong, but in most cases, you have a pretty good idea of what things are going to be like, and that's one of the reasons why you can buy and rent or whatever from abroad with pretty good success rates. But doing the same thing in Nicaragua would be complete a failure if possible in any way whatsoever. So that's just a different thing. So we're just going to work from this budgetary perspective and say we're going to go with $500 as a number for a comfortable 3-bedroom house. This is a number that I feel I could go out within 48 hours. Now, obviously, I know exactly who to contact and where to go look, but I could come up with a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, gated community house for around about $500 in multiple parts of the city, probably within 48 hours. I may not be able to move in within 48 hours, but I would be able to find it. And I certainly know people from my channel who have done it for less in gorgeous gated communities, gorgeous construction, not a huge house, but a very comfortable American-ish style house, kind of like something you might encounter in a Miami, something you might encounter in an upscale Gulf Coast kind of area. It would not be completely out of place in a Texas and only a little bit out of place in a California. Very nice houses, nice style, nice community, lots of protection, and the number, and we just got this, so this is a really great number to know. I know multiple people in this particular community. It's a fantastic community. They got a 3-bedroom, I'm pretty sure it's a 2-bath, with a small backyard. I know that there's another configuration that generally costs more that has a pool in the backyard. I think theirs is just the standard backyard, with parking for 1 vehicle, gated community, and their price for the rental is $450 per month. That's unfurnished. And then they have a $20 security fee because you have to pay for the monthly maintenance and your portion of the security for every month that you're there. So the total, I don't know why they separate it. It should be 1 fee, but it is. And the real price of having the house there is $470 per month, which is on the high side, right? But it's important to understand that this isn't comfortable. This is entry-level luxury at $470. Right, you would, even coming from the U.S. and wanting U.S. standards, and this is with built-in air conditioning. You don't have to add air conditioning, I don't believe, to the house that they have. Most of the houses that I know in that community have air conditioning pre-installed. If it's not pre-installed, it's definitely ready for it. But I believe most of them have it already. So that's what you could do today in Leon. So when people say, oh, it's really hard to find, no. This is real prices today. Now, when we go look at houses and say this is $120, right, we have shown them, and you could live in them. But to call it comfortable, I think we all can see why it could be a struggle. We all know why someone is okay with it. But a family of 4, no, it's not going to work. Some of those ones at 180, it's pretty tight. More, it's better. But you get up into these 350s to 450s, and you're finding lots of options that are very comfortable. And the thing that you're wondering is, do I get a community pool? Do I get my own pool? Do I get a big backyard? Do I get security? Do I get an amazing location in the middle of things? Do I get a view, right? You're not going to get all those things, but you are going to get one of them, right? And so something's coming with that price. And so that gives us, so we're going to throw out 500, which I don't know any place in the country. San Juan del Sur, definitely we could do it. Much harder, but we could do it. Managua, even in the good parts of Managua, the fancy parts, we can find a $500. It's going to be hard, but if we're willing to go just a little bit outside, then it's really easy. Leon, piece of cake. Chinandega, again, piece of cake. Granada, Granada's a little bit of a challenge, but could be done. Maybe not in the historic center, but definitely could be done. Huigalpa, Boaco, Matagalpa, Esteli, Jinotega, for sure. Now, you may find the inventory very low in many of those places, but can you get a place for 500? Absolutely. Rivas, slam dunk. Most small communities, again, small communities, you're going to struggle with inventory, but you're not going to struggle with price. So at $500, I think we are safe to say we have $3,000 left to look at the budget for the other things we need for the month. Now let's talk about electric costs, because depending on where you go and what you do, this could be a major part of your budget or a minor part of your budget, but it's important to consider. So a lot of people like to point out and try to skew the information by using kilowatt hours as a comparison, because Nicaragua has high cost kilowatt hours. And if you're in a situation where you're paying every kilowatt hour that you generate or that you consume, then you are going to pay more per kilowatt hour than you would in the United States. This is misleading for a few reasons. One is that things tend to be built more efficient here in Nicaragua. That is not always the case. They are different, and it's important to understand. In the United States, houses tend to be better sealed. In Nicaragua, houses tend to be better prepared to not need to be air conditioned all the time or in total. So to compare, my house in Texas, which was a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, was fully enclosed, and we used central air, so we had to cool all of it, even if we were cooking in the kitchen and it was generating heat and we didn't need to keep it cool because it was only, say, 80 degrees outside. Too warm for sleeping, but not too warm for cooking. But we would generate that heat as we baked a cake for something, and it would heat up the whole house, and the central air would have to work extra hard to keep it cool. That's not very efficient. Here in Nicaragua, I have a much larger house, maybe 3 times the physical square footage, and a 9-bedroom, 5-bath. Now here, we individually air condition each of the bedrooms, including the office, which is one of the bedrooms, and we have a guest bedroom, and we have a bedroom that we converted into a video game and media room, and so forth. Each of them has air conditioning. But, for example, my kids are in their bedrooms right now, and they're not in the media room. So they're not cooling the media room. The kitchen and the salon are not air conditioned. They're not air conditionable. They're essentially outdoors, but with a roof over them. They are wide open to the air, so they stay reasonably cool, but they're never going to get air conditioned. So if you need air conditioning in your kitchen, this would be a terrible design for you. But of course, this is not the only style of house available in Nicaragua, but there's a lot like this. But even when you have a house where the kitchen is enclosable, it is common to leave it open except for on extreme days, and only air condition when you absolutely need it, which would be only a few days of the year, whereas a bedroom you may air condition nearly every day of the year. Now, I live in León, one of the hottest cities in the country, so I think this is worth noting that I'm from New York. I'm used to the extreme cold. Now, I have been here a number of years, but this is important when you're talking about long-term living here. And generally, I keep my office open during the day. I don't normally run air conditioning like I am right now, unless I'm doing recording in the office, because then the sound of, because you gotta have the doors open, right? I'm not gonna do it with sealed. It would be too loud. There's just too much noise going on in the rest of the house. So I keep the doors closed, and then I turn on the air conditioning, especially if I'm wearing a hat and stuff. Then I get just a little bit warmer, and I don't want to start sweating because I am often on the edge, which admittedly, it's pretty warm, but I've gotten to a point that I generally don't need air conditioning in my office, or if I do, it's just a few hours of the day. It is not the bulk of the time. Same thing in the rest of the day. I really don't use air conditioning during the day, and at night when I sleep, if it's just me and I'm not air conditioning for my wife, if she's traveling or something, I don't use air conditioning. Now she does, so different people have different air conditioning needs, but I will sleep just me and the dogs. I will sometimes not even open the windows. Now generally I will open the windows, but not always, and I find it almost always comfortable. It is rare that I need air conditioning to sleep at night, so I can, depending on what I'm doing, go an entire day without air conditioning. That would be rare, but I'm air conditioning only small spaces. My office here is not that large. My office is encased in concrete, right? I have a heavy concrete floor, big cinder block walls. Now the windows are not the most efficient thing, but we did put in curtains, and that does a lot to help with the insulation. There's a lot of things you could do if you were moving into a house that you owned or were going to be there for a long time. You could do things to seal it up, but a house in the United States has better sealed windows in most cases, so that's one way that the US does it better, but here we have smaller spaces to air condition with more efficient air conditioning units. So it's one of the ways that Nicaragua does it better. So it's important to understand that it's just very different, and you'll need to, or from a practical perspective, need to change how you approach air conditioning and how do you approach different aspects of living within your own house. It's just in America, we do certain things because they're practical based on the climate and construction methods that are popular there, and those things are popular mostly because they're what's practical based on available building materials and again, the climate. Here in Nicaragua, same thing. These are the building materials that are in abundance, and these are the ones that work well given the climate. And so it is a different place you need to adjust. Trying to recreate the physical construction materials that are cheap and easy and local in one place in another just because you're used to them is a terrible idea, and that's not a way to live comfortably. So as long as you're willing to make reasonable adjustments, I think you'll find that it's quite nice. So importantly, taking my family of 5 people, that's my wife and I and our children, and my business partner, who's kind of like a large child that comes with us. When we lived in Texas, our electric bill was generally between $400 and $800 per month, and that was with central air in a 3-bedroom, 2-bath. Coming here to Nicaragua, we have a completely different picture. When we get charged per kilowatt hour, and each kilowatt hour is more expensive than in the US, we are typically between $200 and $400 per month. Not incredibly different, but noticeably a small bit cheaper. But it's also important to understand that I was paying those rates in Texas a decade ago, and I'm paying these rates in Nicaragua now. So the value of money has changed some, and so that's important. So it's easily more than it sounds like cheaper here. But very importantly, rarely do we end up in a situation where we're paying every kilowatt hour. That's actually not that common in Nicaragua. Plus, there is a sliding scale. So if you're using lots of electricity, like we are, we're at the top of that scale. We're paying those premium hours, and we should be, because we are expats with enough funds to do so, and it's a means of being taxed that is completely optional, right? It's a way of taxing the rich based on a luxury usage of power, which I think is excellent. If you are poor and cannot use that much power or cannot afford it, you'll be paying essentially nothing for power. If you are super rich but simply are unwilling to be taxed in that way, and you're going to fight the man and not use any power and show him, then you also won't use that power. It's only if you actually consume electricity at a larger than minimal level that you actually have to pay these higher rates that people talk about. So it's a really wonderful system as far as allowing those of us who are getting luxury out of it to help support those who just need light, who just need a fan, who just need to be able to do their homework at night or whatever. It really is a good system. But it is rare in Nicaragua that you will pay every kilowatt hour. I don't want to say, I guess rare is the wrong term. It is not the median. Many people do, and we now do, but there was a period of time where we were on fixed pricing. There's also a lot of places that use variable pricing, but they don't charge every kilowatt hour. I don't know what creates these different situations. I do know there's a lot of different mechanisms that cause them to arise. I know different areas have different rules, different parts of the city have different rates. So just moving out here to the suburbs, it's a barrio right on the edge of the city, that lowered our per kilowatt hour. So our rate for the exact same kilowatts here is lower than in other parts of the city. So we have a number of factors to consider. One is that you likely will use quite a bit less power here in Nicaragua. So people who say, look at the kilowatt hours and do your research, this is misleading, right? Doing your full research is what I'm telling you is these are the factors and why we and everyone we know sees lower cost here than anything comparable in the US as far as lifestyle. But it requires living somewhat of a Nicaraguan lifestyle, right? If you really want to do central air, American building techniques and so forth, yes, you'll probably end up paying more. But that's not what people do here, and there's no reason to try to, if you don't like Nicaraguan lifestyle, why are you coming, right? Number 2, you're probably not going to pay every kilowatt hour. So even though you're using less, even though it costs more, you're probably going to save. You'll probably save more for most of the time that we lived here. Again, we were 400 to 800 in Texas. For years, we were here at roughly 80 to 90. So we're not talking about being just a little bit cheaper. We have been consistently much cheaper. I have had an apartment for years at fixed price of $10. Now, how much power does it use in a tiny apartment? Only so much, but I suspect if you were to look at it in the United States and use power, it would be more than $10. It would probably be more than $50. Would it be $100? No, I don't think so. But it depends where you are in the US and what you're doing. But here with 2 air conditioners and the entire place being able to be sealed and able to air condition, it is relatively cheap. Now, like I said, here we never air condition our kitchen where all the heat is generated in the house. That is open air and the wind just takes that heat away. That does a lot to make the house more efficient. So the areas that we do air condition, not only are they smaller, but they're also less generative of heat. And so it works out really well. It's a great system most of the time for a lot of people. So assume that you need to budget enough to be able to pay some pretty hefty electric bills just in case. So I do know from having a family of 4 at a large estate here that we could run up as much as $400 per month with loads of air conditioning, working from home in offices, and that's 3 adults and 2 children. Plus we have at least one person who always stays here additionally and one person working in the house. So we are functioning as a family of 7 with 2 dogs that are also generating heat and constantly causing doors to be open and closed, and we're coming up to $400. So with good planning and a little bit of proper use of air conditioning and not being completely ridiculous, but with several of those rooms running 24/7, getting above 400 should not be something you have to worry about. So that's an upper bound to discuss. If you have a more modern home that is sealed and designed for use with air conditioning, you're probably going to find quite a bit lower air conditioning cost and just general power cost. So you should be looking at much more like $50 to $200 per month, which is not super low, but when you consider all the other cost savings, it's really not bad. So that's just an important thing to consider, because it is potentially an area where you could spend a lot and an area where you potentially could spend almost nothing. And most people with a little bit of planning and a little bit of change of lifestyle manage to save quite a bit over the US, but it's not so much as to reflect other costs in Nicaragua, meaning quite often things here may be a third or a quarter of the cost in the US, and that's not going to be the case with electric in most cases. If you get super lucky with one of those fixed price places, one, just be happy. 2, never give it up, right? It's such a cost savings that you want to keep it for forever. So that's just something to consider. And of course, if you're not using power, shut everything off and let that power drop to that essentially free tier. You might be paying $5 to $8 per month for your house while it's idle. So little things can go a long way, and it shouldn't be too big of a deal. But at this point, we had $3,000 left. We're going to assume $200 for your electric costs. You're down to $2,800 per month to talk about. Now, it was brought up that you need to budget phones for the adults and for the kids, and that's reasonable. So compare that to the United States. You can figure out whatever cost you would do in the United States and how many people you're going to give phones to. Here, it is common to give children phones, and you'll generally want to have your kids have phones. There's a lot of peace of mind. So one thing that's nice is if you want to buy brand new Android phones for your kids, you can get them here for under $200 from real makers with quality phones. They're not super fancy, but it is an option, whereas in the US, that's pretty difficult to do. Possible, obviously, but much more difficult. Here, you can go to the mall and pick them up. So assuming you're going to get Claro or Tigo service, which are the only ones provided here in country, then you're going to be paying, generally we have to look at pre-pago, which means you pay ahead of time. That's what I use, and it comes out to roughly $12 per month per person. Now, if you're not going to be traveling and leaving the house, you can end up with that being a little bit cheaper. But let's ignore that. It is a place where you could save a few dollars. If your kids are going to be home, they're doing homeschool, they never travel without the parents, you don't care if they have a phone, then don't have them have their service active. When they're in the house, have them use Wi-Fi. And when you're traveling, you're doing something, then turn on your service just for a week or 2 weeks or whatever is practical. You can buy it at up to 15 days at a time. Technically, you can buy it 30 days at a time. Don't look at the numbers and you'll be like, wait, why would I ever do that? Yeah, exactly. No, 15 is the max you would ever actually consider. So you're going somewhere, you get them 15 days of service for $6, and that's it. And then maybe it's a month before they need service again. But for those of us who need it all the time, we spend roughly, it's like $11.60 per month to have that really good service. And that's super high speed. That's with unlimited data on the social media networks, on the Instagrams, the Facebooks, the YouTubes, and those types of services, unlimited. And with other service, yeah, it's limited, but it's like your email and stuff. It's very rare that you're going to come anywhere close to the data cap under normal circumstances, right? So very cheap. And you get just all the services that you would want. And you get to keep a number even when you're not using the phone for, like, I think up to 90 days. And technically, I've never heard, I don't know if technically, anecdotally, I don't know any person who's ever had their number shut off, even if they've gone over the amount of time where, in theory, it's going to happen. But be aware it could happen. But getting a new number is like $2, so not a big deal. So if you're going to have a family of 4, you need to budget $48 per month to have everybody have service every day of the year. Not too bad. but it's something to consider along with everything else. Now, of course, you're going to want internet for home as well. I mentioned that Wi-Fi, and that's good, right? You're probably going to have your Netflix. You're probably going to have those things. So, and those are budgets that you need to have on your own. Like, I can't begin to suppose what things you want to buy that aren't part of your living in a different country, because they're just part of the things that you bring with you, right? They're not part of your cost of living. But we were going to talk about them in a second. But you are almost always, for comfort, going to want to have home internet. Living completely off of phones is not something normal people would consider comfortable. If you really don't use the internet and it's just, cell phones are adequate, then save this money, I suppose. But in most of the country, you're able to get quite good internet. Nothing, not like running a business from home. Just normal, everyday consumer internet for about $35. We're going to budget $52 for the very convenient reason that when combined with your cell phones, turns into a $100 budget. Now, I spend more on my internet, but that's because I need high-speed fiber because, in case you didn't notice, I run a media business out of the house, and I am uploading and downloading enormous files at a constant rate every single day. So I live in a very different lifestyle, so I need upload speeds about 5 times what normal is, which is not a big deal. So I spend $80 per month for business class, high-speed, symmetric fiber. And many of my customers, hundreds of my customers in the United States, can't get service that cheap nor that fast. So this is very nice. It's been quite stable. We're very happy with it. So let's just use that number and say we're going to spend another $100 on that. So we're down to $2,700 left that we get to work with. Now, there was a mention of you've got to have all these streaming services. You must have them. Well, there's something that as a luxury you may want to have. However, one of the things that is important to understand here is that many people do away with them for a lot of reasons. One, lifestyles change when you come to Nicaragua, and recreating the consumer mentality of the United States when living here is not necessarily something you want to do. Even with kids, you don't necessarily have the same behaviors. And I know some people will. They're like, I want to recreate everything for my kids and make them still mostly feel like they're in America, or maybe you want to do this for some amount of time, or Canada, or wherever you're coming from. And that's fine. Nothing wrong with that. In those cases, you need to budget. What's your Netflix going to cost? What's your Paramount Plus going to cost? What's your HBO Max going to cost? And so forth. And of course, those things work here. Now, it is worth noting that if you get them here, in some cases, like Netflix, it is cheaper. But more importantly, one of the things that is very important to understand is that when you live in Nicaragua and you're willing to adopt a Nicaraguan lifestyle, there is the ability to, for those who remember the United States a number of years ago, they used to talk about torrenting videos and such, and not that I'm recommending you do that, but that is completely legal here in Nicaragua, and that is how Nicaraguans do it. So one of the reasons that Nicaragua has such low cost of living when it comes to media services is because they have no cost with their media services. And so if you are avoiding doing the things that Nicaraguans do, then you'll need to budget some amount for the amount of streaming and those types of services that you want to maintain. But those are things that, one, you may be able to lower the cost because when services detect that you're in Nicaragua, they will give you a discount in most cases, right? Steam games are cheaper, GOG games are cheaper, Netflix is cheaper, and so forth, because they know you're in a lower cost country and those services should be priced lower to make sense. And so they adjust for that because they know if they don't, you'll never consider using them. They want to make themselves at least somewhat convenient so that you give it a try, because the alternative is you'll get everything that they offer and more for free, so they can only push it things so far. So that's a budget you have to come up with for yourself, and just be aware you need to add it on to whatever numbers we're doing here. Do your own calculations, of course. We're just giving you the tools to build up your own budget. But this is something that you could, for multiple reasons, get down to essentially zero if you want. But if you want to pay for those services, you can. But it's when people are trying to make it sound expensive to live here, they will repeat those things as if you must copy whatever you did in the United States. And they will also assume that you did those things in the United States. Okay, most of us do, so that's reasonable and fair, but it's important to understand that even to get the same things here could be zero cost, depending on how you approach it and how you're willing to approach it and how you want to, how you want it to be presented and to feel. But that's important, right? So do your own legwork. and decide how you want to budget for that. Now, of course, we have ancillary costs. There's all kinds of things that are going to come up during the month that you may be paying for. You got transportation, you got entertainment, and all those things. Those are very hard to budget for because everybody has a very different look as to what that entails. If you're someone who has a family wants to go out and do big things, we're going to travel to other countries. We're going to fly around the world. We're going to, right? Instantly you're like, well, there's no way to make a budget for that, right? You have to provide the budget based on what you have and what you want to do. But if it comes down to what living is, then it's very different. Now, some people come and they want to live in, let's say, Managua, and they want to be able to go out and go bowling. They want to go out and do laser tag. They want to go out and go to Salvador Allende Park and go along the waterfront. Great. Other people come and they want to live in Salinas Grandes. And someone just asked me about this yesterday. And of course, if you go to Salinas Grandes, there's nothing to do. There is maybe one small restaurant that's mostly a comedor, basically just, street food in a kind of restaurant setting. I honestly don't know if there is a restaurant there or not. We never found one, but I think there's something. But basically, you have nothing to do. There's no store in town. There's no restaurants. There's no nightclubs. There's no things to do, no activities. Your activities are stay home, hang out with the neighbors, sit on the beach. Right. And then, of course, that's where Netflix and video games and stuff become very big because your children or you will be very, very isolated. Some people come here for that purpose. That is exactly what they're looking for. And we find lots of people like that. So if that's what you're looking for, that very isolated, stay-at-home kind of vibe, then Nicaragua is going to save you so much money. And in our own example, we don't need streaming services, and my kids rarely like to go out. When they do, it's mostly, we like to go to Managua, and they like to go out to eat. It's mostly food-related things and a little bit of shopping, but they're extremely frugal with their shopping, so their monthly shopping budgets are in the double digits, US dollars, that is. So they're buying very little, but they may go out and get a stuffed animal. They may go out and get a new coffee cup or something, and they're going to cheap, what we call Chinese stores, right? They're going to places that are owned by Chinese companies and sell low-cost goods manufactured in China most of the time because they have cute characters, the style of things that my kids like, and so they like to go shopping there. And they spend maybe $15 on a trip to Managua, plus then we go out to eat. That's big entertainment for them. And we can stay in hotels that we like for under $30, right? So it's enough money you would need to budget for it if that's things you want to do, but it's also, you can see, not a bank breaker depending. Now, transportation. This is pretty important because depending on where you live, transportation could be pretty major. Now, Nicaraguans typically ride bus and use public transportation. So the option to get around at super low cost is definitely there. And it's worth noting that I spent my first year living in a small community of 3,500 people, 17 kilometers outside of a city, without a car. My first year, maybe more than a year. So during that time, we got to know how to use buses. We got to know how to hitch rides with people. We used taxis from time to time. And it's very approachable, very doable. This is what most Nicaraguans do. Most. That's really important. And maybe not most expats, but easily many expats, right? But I think it's most, at least in this area. The average expat does not seem to have a car. I actually know pretty few. The expats rely on their Nicaraguan friends who have cars, not the other way around. Now, there may be more expats who can drive. The incidence of driver's licenses within the expat community is high, but the incidence of vehicles is low. Of those of us who live on the beach, it really stands out when someone has a vehicle. And we now have one, and we drive in from far away and go places, and people are constantly looking for rides or wondering where we are, and we're always forgetting that everyone else is constantly in a taxi. But a lot of the people who live on the beach especially, they have no vehicles. Or some have just like a golf cart for getting around locally. They don't have a car. So this is not a far-flung idea that you may not need a car. Now, again, if you're going to be living in Salinas Grandes, you're going to want a 4x4 vehicle. So that's going to cost you extra. And every time you do a trip, it's going to cost you extra fuel and such. But if you're willing to live in Las Piñatas and not have a vehicle, you could make it happen really easily. So depending on which beach you're on, it could be very different. But of course, if you have a vehicle, you can get a cheap old one and you can just drive it once in a while and still make it very cheap. But if you want to do a lot of travel, you can, if you have the money for it, buy a car. And from what we've seen, cars are cheaper here than in the US. We are completely blown away by how low cost vehicles have been when buying new. Financing here, terrible. Purchasing a car, super cheap with really nice, comfortable, brand new, under warranty cars right from the dealer for as even under $20,000. Try doing that in the US. Maybe you can, but I'm not aware of cars being available. And the cheapest car companies that we've been asking for are just starting to move in. So our costs are going down, not up currently, with many new vendors moving into the country within the last 6 months, and many more have been over the last like 4 years. It's been a complete change of the landscape. I've been car shopping in the last few days. We have actually purchased a new car, because we have one old used one that we've had for several years. We have a new one that we purchased maybe a year ago, and now we are replacing the older used one with a brand new SUV, and we're going to do a whole video about that process, about the vehicle, and it's going to change a lot of the filming that we do. I'm very excited about what it means for the channel, but in doing this process, we were able to get a variety of cars. We have so many options looking well below $30,000, looking at brand new vehicles, including SUVs that are fairly large. So that's really important to understand that you could save money with even buying vehicles here because it's not that expensive. And again, like the electric, people will point out that the cost per gallon of fuel here is higher than the US average, but not as high as, say, the California average. So it's not a completely unreasonable number, but it's on the high-ish side for the United States at most times. However, ours has been locked in price and the US has been going up. It is possible that ours is cheaper now than the US, but I don't believe so. I think we're just slightly better than we were. But so this is important to understand that our fuel here is not crazy cheap. It's a little bit on the expensive side. But our highway speeds are very low. Our vehicles here tend to be quite small. Everything is tuned for the type of driving that is done here. Most vehicles are stick shift, and the amount of fuel that you typically use for the same tasks here is generally quite a bit less. So like the electric, if the goal is to 100% recreate things like, well, in the United States, I drove a Toyota Tacoma and I went 100 miles per week, that I must recreate. Well, if you're going to replace the Toyota Tacoma with the Toyota Hilux, which is the closest equivalent we have here, it's basically the same vehicle, and you were to drive 100 miles per week, then yes, Nicaragua would almost certainly cost a little bit more than the United States. Very close, just a tiny bit more. If you were driving at the exact same highway speeds for those two things. Here, it is very rare that you will get close to the highway speeds you would have done in the United States, so the cost will probably actually be lower here because of the amount slower that you would go. But let's just assume it's the same speed. Okay, Nicaragua will be a little bit more expensive. But to do the same tasks, whatever is making you drive 100 miles in the United States likely will only make you drive 30 to 40 miles here in Nicaragua. Generally. So the cost savings is often quite large because between that slower speed and just so many fewer miles that you need to do, often people find that they are spending much less on transit. All that said, that's if you buy vehicles. It is completely viable to use public transportation. And if I want to do something like take if I want to take taxis, yeah, it's going to be cheaper than a car in most cases, but not a lot cheaper, just a little bit cheaper. But I have someone else driving for me and I don't have to park and deal with stuff and take care of a car and get a loan or anything. So that's nice. And if I'm staying home, no cost. But if I'm willing to take the public transportation and take the buses, this is what most Nicaraguans do, and the cost of transport around the country drops to practically nothing. And so there is a range of what transportation is like, but unlike the United States, where public transportation outside of like trains is generally considered to be kind of icky, here it is completely normal, and it's actually kind of a cool part of society to learn how to do. So for me, if I was to take the public bus and go to the city bus terminal, from here it's going to cost me something less than 50 cents to go all the way to the bus terminal. And from that bus terminal, I can get a $2.10 ticket to go to the capital. So for less than $3, I can go from the beach side of Leon all the way across the city on the city buses, and then cross from the city of Leon to the city of Managua, get downtown-ish in Managua at the UCA terminal, at the Terminal Interlocales Managua Leon on Pope John Paul II. And from there, I could take the public buses or a taxi wherever I need to go in Managua. Or it's actually close to a lot of things. Many people walk from there. Not necessarily recommended, but they only run those buses during daylight, so it's not that bad. But during night, I wouldn't go to that area. Not that it's terrible, but it's definitely on the sketchy side. It's an older bus terminal in the middle of the city. Not the kind of place you go at night in any city anywhere in the world. Just my 2 cents. But that's a really important perspective. That, yeah, even with a family of 4, that's $12 to go all the way to Managua if all 4 of you need to go. And then returning from Managua, $12. So yes, you need to pay to get around Managua. So the evaluation of how often would you do that, does it make sense to have a car? Very easily, you could change your lifestyle from always driving to letting other people drive, using public transportation that isn't widely comfortably available in the United States, and find yourself with your budget going much farther. You may have a transportation budget that is absolutely tiny, but it's important to evaluate. Maybe you do want to have a car, and so you're going to need to purchase that and pay for gas and so forth. And so it's just part of the budget to work in. But it is a spot where you likely are going to spend less than the US, and if you want to, can probably spend a lot less than the US. Now, the real thing we need to consider more than anything else, even more than your housing, is your food. No matter what you do, food is going to be your primary cost living in Nicaragua and nearly anywhere. That's normal. So food and how you want to eat, what you want to eat, how you're going to approach that are going to be really big factors. And it's a difficult one to really to nail down, right? But if you look at the cost of meals and going out to restaurants and such and extrapolate from there, you can get a fair idea of what things are going to cost. If you're looking at basic street food, it is common for people to eat for between $1 and $3 per meal. That's not unreasonable to get a filling meal. Maybe not the most healthy, not something I'm recommending that you do every day, but it is doable. It is also groceries can be quite cheap, but you have to shop like a Nicaraguan. Many people say that to be comfortable, you have to shop like an American, which is not really practical. And of course, then you're going to be paying a premium, not a premium compared to the United States, but a premium compared to Nicaragua. If you want to shop like an American and buy products shipped in from America, of course, they're being purchased at full price in the United States. And then additionally, after whatever cost it is in the United States, put on a boat, shipped here, taxes paid, shipped to a store, and sold at a premium store with profit. On top of the profit that was already made in the United States, of course, they're going to be expensive. Same thing as if you took Nicaraguan food and shipped it to the United States and tried to buy it in the US. Of course, it's going to cost more than in Nicaragua. That's how things work. But going to a fancy grocery store like La Colonia or La Union is not a problem. You can go there and get good deals and not break the bank. They will cost more than other options for sure. That's just how premium things work, right? If you want a gorgeous American-style grocery store with lots of air conditioning that's super cold with a good selection of things and people who, do all the American-style customer service, you're going to pay more. But if you want to go a little bit cheaper, you can shop at places like Pali, which is owned by Walmart, and they have, or at Ahora. Now I don't know what it's called. Ahora, it's like Ahora, right? Save now. That can't be the right name. I think it's Ahora Más, save more, because there's Ahora with 2 R's, that is savings, and Ahora, which is now with 1 R. So I'm pretty sure it's savings now, Ahora Más. Savings, more savings. It's a tough one. They're owned by La Colonia and are Nicaraguan. Anyway, this second tier of grocery stores is much more common for Nicaraguans to shop at. And there you're going to find lower selection, more basic food items, but you're also going to find better prices and less customer service. The lines are going to be longer. They don't have as many amenities and so forth. But we do a lot of our shopping there because it does give us most of the things that we eat most of the time, especially if we're cooking at home, and works out just fine. A lot of expats living in Nicaragua also find that doing things like going into Managua from, about once a month and doing runs to places like PriceSmart can do a lot to lower your cost as well, because PriceSmart has bulk items and some special deals and some food items that expats have a tendency to want. So there's a little bit of learning how you eat, learning what you want to do that can do a lot to lower that price. Now, if you're going to cook at home, a lot of the time you're going to be in great shape because groceries cost very little here as long as you're avoiding those specialty items. So if you're at Pali or you go to the local markets where you'll save even more, you can get fruits and veg and meat and bread and rice and beans and tortillas and all the foods that Nicaraguans eat and across society broadly at incredibly low prices. Eggs especially so low compared to the United States, but even meat and such lower than the United States. So you have this huge cost savings in food. But you can go out to eat. You don't have to avoid restaurants, but you'll probably not want to go out to eat every meal on this budget. At some point, yes, you have to still live like normal people. It is not a baller budget. The question is, can this lean budget for a family of four allow for comfortable living? And the answer is a clear yes. There's no way to try to say it's not going to give you the option of comfort, but it's also no way to claim that it's not a budget, right? It's still a budget, and it's still on the lean side, but it is a very capable budget that can give you a very comfortable house in a very safe neighborhood with options for a lot of things. But food is going to be the biggest one, and that's going to be your deciding factor as to how much additional budget you have for things everywhere else. So what we found is that with a family slightly larger, when we settled in and really figured out what we were doing, that it made more sense for us to have a full-time maid, which is you need to budget at least $300 a month for a full-time person. You really can't save much by going to a part-time if you want to do that. By her going out and doing the shopping, she's able to save us a lot of money on the shopping. She knows what to get, has more time to focus on it, is able to cook for the kids. Now, for us, it's a big deal because we still work. We're not retired. So because we do that, we're able to spend more time doing other things and being productive, putting out this show and so forth, because this uses a lot of time. My kids are able to go order food, and she'll just make them, fish tacos or whatever it is they want. Avocado toast, right? They'll just have that stuff made for them. I don't have to know about it. And she'll go to the grocery store and get prices on it that I can't get or reasonably can't get, because she's going to go into the market. She's going to go from place to place, right? She'll go to the lady who makes tortillas in the street and get them there. She'll go to the fruit stand and get the fruit there. She'll go into Pali and get the things we need there, like the American style cheese that we can't get in the market and so forth. And she makes a lot of food items that are not things we would normally make, but are absolutely fantastic. A great example, and we have a video about Marcela making these, is repochetas. I love repochetas. They're really similar to a quesadilla, but they've got a kind of Nicaraguan flair to them. And the name does mean different things in different regions of the country. Here in Leon, it's basically a quesadilla that is pan fried, so it's crispy, but it's essentially just cheese and a corn tortilla. They get the corn tortillas up the street. The cheese is from the Pali, and then they dice up onions, tomatoes, cilantro, and make what they call salad here. And they take a little bit of crema it's akin to sour cream, but it's not exactly the same. And that's a really good meal. You get like 2 of those, and you put the salad on it, and it is delicious, and it's reasonably healthy. And sometimes they'll add beans to it, which cost almost nothing else. And like egg dishes and all kinds of things. Very inexpensive. And because she's able to go out and get those better prices, it means that it offsets the cost of having her cook. And because she's cooking, it makes us more efficient. And because she's cooking, we're far less likely to go out to restaurants. And so we save a lot of money by not going to restaurants. That's where the real savings is. But she's able to offset that savings other places. So yes, at $3,500 a month, taking 10% of your budget and using it for a cook and cleaner in your house may not make sense. But it is a consideration that if you're tempted to otherwise go out to restaurants and do things that end up being more expensive all the time, it could be very good. But if you find that you still go to restaurants all the time, then it could be pretty bad. So it all depends. If you're working, if both parents are working, then it may be very good. If both are retired and have lots of free time to clean the house and cook, it could be pretty bad. Your mileage will vary, obviously, quite a bit, but many people do find it to be a very good thing. Now, in the discussion that prompted this video, the idea of private schools came up. Now, this is interesting because I know very few people who come to the country with kids and send them to private school. This is, I don't believe, the norm. Now, if you're living in San Juan del Sur with all the expats, it may be the norm because there's lots of private schools and it's a very premium area. So if you're going to San Juan del Sur, the assumption is that you have a much higher budget than people in the rest of the country. It is not where you go if you're trying to save money. Again, you can live there quite frugally, but you don't choose it based off of it being a low-cost location. It is the highest cost location in the country. So people who are going there generally have much deeper pockets, and it is a culture of being around other expats. And so you have lots of expats to potentially go to school with. So the idea of private schools for expat kids makes a lot more sense. In most of the country, there's very few educational opportunities for those who are not Spanish speaking. So if you're watching my show and you're an expat from an English-speaking country, you have kids who speak English and you're moving into Nicaragua, chances are most of the housing options you will find around the country are not going to be located nearby to a school that will have accommodations for your children. It's not necessarily a big problem. There are many ways to handle this, and this will all depend on what makes sense for you, where you're from, what you need to do, and so forth. For us, we have homeschooled since the very beginning. We have been living on the road as expats for a very long time. Actually, next week, I believe, is our 10-year anniversary, and I need to do a show about that. But we always planned for this. So we homeschooled from the very beginning, had everything set up, made sure we were in a jurisdiction that was positive for that, made sure we moved to countries that were positive for that, and so forth. And it has been a wonderful experience that we are so thankful for. Our kids, I've done a number of videos about this, but our kids have, we feel, such a better life and a better education because of this. Not everybody can do that. Not everybody wants to do that. Not everybody's kids want to do that. And so everyone has different needs. We know lots of people who homeschool here and homeschool other places. So that is a very viable option, and that is often free. So before anyone jumps into you have to have a cost for that, I don't know anyone who has a cost for that, right? This is not the norm, at least in this part of Nicaragua. So when we say this isn't something that most people budget for, we truly mean it isn't, but you may need to, so consider it. If you're going to go to private schools here, this is interesting, right? We don't know any expats currently who use private schools. I do know some in the past who have. We do know that most of the Nicaraguans that we know do use private schools. So that is something that we see. The private schools are generally in a few $100s per quarter. And so that's pretty affordable. But if you're on $3,500, it is a noticeable part of your budget. So it's important to research what schools you may be interested in and what they're going to cost. We do know people who are now adults and have moved back who may have gone to school in some of these places like Pureza and Calisans and La Salle. Right, and these are pretty affordable at generally no more than $200 per month. But again, at $3,500, that is a big part of your budget. But it's not this crippling amount of money that you may be expecting. But it is very important to understand that this is not something you necessarily need. And of course, if you're going to be truly living here, the public school is open to your children. Not saying I recommend it, but I do know people from the channel who've had the public school officials come around and offer for their children to go for free to the public school and actually say, we would love for your children to come. We think it would be good for them, and we think it would be good for the other kids to have this exposure to people from another country. So they're absolutely welcome in the classroom. But of course, if your kids are going to struggle with Spanish, they don't want to learn Spanish, they don't know any Spanish, this could be daunting, scary, problematic for a lot of reasons, so just be aware of that. But you do have these options. You have options of private tutors, which is not necessarily that expensive. You could keep in mind that a public school teacher earns or earned recently, right? I have a friend who is a public school teacher, and her take home at the end of the month between what she was paid minus what she had to pay to do her job was $164. She was a full-time English teacher and the only English teacher in her district who actually spoke English. That's how much she was making, $164 per month. So if you're willing to spend $300 to pay the minimum wage and all the things you need to do to have a full-time teacher, yes, again, that is a huge part of your budget. But if you have two kids, that's $300 for both. You could have a full-time Nicaraguan teacher who speaks English potentially be there to be a full-time teacher for your kids. That is an option, right? I don't know anyone who does that. Completely an option. And a great job for somebody, all right? Because it's, two kids. If you have 4 kids, right, like you should not be a problem. That's not so many for a full-time teacher who has nothing else to do. So that's an option. Private schools, not that much. If you have $100 per kid, and generally you get a discount for extra kids. You can homeschool, and a lot of places in the United States and Canada and Europe offer online schools. So they're doing it from home, but they're still going through a formal school. Those options exist as well and are very common today. And if you're coming from a place like us, we're coming from Texas. Texas provides those things 100% free. So whether we wanted to go to public school in the U.S. still, 100% free. Homeschool through the U.S. system, 100% free. Going to public school in Nicaragua, 100% free. Going to private school here, generally affordable, but will be noticeable on your budget. Wanting to have a full-time nanny who does tutoring and teaches your kids, but is a trained teacher, affordable, but a big part of your budget. But things to consider. But those are the kinds of things. You got to be thinking about all these different expenses you may have. But generally, all of the different categories are so optional and so inexpensive that there's room in your budget for things. But when we're talking about food, one of the things to get used to is take everything and divide it by 30. So if you're saying, well, we're going to spend $100 on a family of 4 for food per day, that's $3,000 a month. You're going to need to make some serious cuts other places to be able to do that. That's a lot of money for food. However, it is worth noting that typically we go out to a restaurant, and most restaurants, now if we're going for fancy places, we're going to a steakhouse, we're getting draft beer, craft, custom microbrew beer, we're getting a bottle of wine and stuff. Yeah, we're going to be spending $20, maybe $25 per person for dinner, but that's very high. If I go to Pane e Vino, a relatively fancy restaurant in Managua, I can get a wonderful pasta dinner for $12, and that's with imported salmon from the United States. If I wanted to get something more like a pesto pasta, it might be $10 to $11 at a really nice place like that. If I'm doing it here in Leon, I would be pretty shocked to be spending $10 on an individual menu item like that, unless it was something really special. So quite often we're able to go out and go to restaurants and eat, and for the entire day come nowhere close to, say, $60. Now, 60 times 30 is still a lot of money. That's $1,800 per month. So that's a huge portion of your budget. But if you're cooking at home, you can get way lower than that. If you're going out to more cost-effective places, way lower than that. You've got a lot of flexibility. And remember, some of the things to use as guidelines. Minimum wage for a Nicaraguan is a little over $200 per month. Well, if Nicaraguans are living at $200 per month, if they're getting into, this is for a single person, if they're getting into the minimum level of middle class for $800 per month, it gives you a bit of guide. Nicaraguans are making this work. You can make it work, right? You're going to have to be flexible. You have to live like a Nicaraguan a little bit, but Nicaraguans are living comfortably, going out, they're going to see bands, they're going on trips, they are enjoying their lives, they're doing fun things, they're having a beer on the beach, they're going mountain climbing, they're going to see the volcanoes, they're going hiking, they're going and playing sports, they're walking their dogs, they're doing all these fun things and enjoying life and watching movies at home and working, and it just everything falls into this cost envelope. You can make it work too. Now, one of the big things that people often talk about, and it's worth mentioning, is medical costs. One of the great things about Nicaragua is that, one, the medical industry is far advanced compared to the United States. People in the U.S. act surprised by this, but I think all Americans know that this is likely true. I understand that this is one of those things that people just really struggle with because they're told that the U.S. is so advanced in its medical practices. But very few things are farther from the truth. The U.S. isn't just expensive, which most Americans accept, it's also a backwater in medical practices, as is Canada. Americans depend on pointing to Canada as an example of, well, but theirs is crap, ours isn't that bad. Well, it kind of is worse in many ways, but not in all ways. But both of them are used as the example worldwide of the world's worst medical system. So if someone ever has pointed to Canada from the United States, the only reason they would ever consider the worst possible option, or vice versa, Canadians pointing to the United States, is that they're trying to misdirect you. You don't compare to the worst to say that you're not that bad. You need to compare to what is median or better. You need to compare to what is the best and say, well, we're really close to the best. We're just not quite there. Someone has to be best. We haven't managed to beat France. Okay, you're not as good as France. No harm, no foul. Italy is still amazing. Spain is still amazing. Germany is still amazing. Japan is still amazing. They're able to do that without being quite as good as France. But you don't try to defend by saying, well, I may have killed a lot of people, but I'm not Jeffrey Dahmer. I'm not eating them after I kill them. Oh, okay, that makes it reasonable that you're a serial killer. No, it does not. You compare against normal people who have killed, on average, nobody, right? That's what healthy looks like. You only make a false comparison like that when you know how bad it is. So if anyone has ever compared your healthcare to the US or Canada, then they're doing so for the purpose of showing that they know it's as bad as it can reasonably get. They can't come up with what would make it defensible. Here in Nicaragua, no, we're not as good as the Colombias and Mexicos, which are the leaders in the region. If you had the money and the time and the only thing you cared about was healthcare, then those are the places you'd likely go to. That's reasonable. But within Central America, we are very close to the top. We're all in very close company. This is one of the best places for it because not only do we have some of the best care, but it is, at least in the public facilities, completely free, and when in the private facilities, very, very affordable. Now, this is something we don't normally budget for because it is so cost effective here that even though we never use the public system, us personally, we pay completely out of pocket for private doctors and in-home care and Vivian Palace and other premium hospital facilities when needed. We only spend on average something like $100 per month for a family of 5. And the only reason we've had any budget like that at all is because one of our family members is above 60 and has had some acute medical issues that we are paying completely out of pocket for. So that has accumulated some amount of cost. But actually, now that I'm saying it, even with my daughter doing braces, even with me seeing a doctor with my broken foot and getting x-rays and adding everything up, having to have in-home treatment for weeks because of the infection in my knee, when we put it all together, I would suspect we're below $50 per month actual cost over a period of 4 years for everything paying out of pocket for premium private. And all of that is because we're willing to pay for premium private. We could use the free public, which is pretty good all of the time. And we know people who are going through the public system. For example, Marcela, who is going through stage 4 Hodgkin's lymphoma, and we do have the GoFundMe about that in there. We have had a video about that. We do talk about it on a regular basis. I'm not mentioning it here for that purpose. However, she is going through major cancer treatments and has been for months. Her total cost of care is not zero. It actually does have some cost, but it's been below $100 for, at this point, I think we're on month 7 or 8 of her cancer process. And all of those medical fees were for medical things that happened outside of the hospital and weren't part of the medical system, but reasonably needed to be done, which is like medicine when she's not getting it from the hospital and stuff. So there has been a few costs here and there, but they're extremely low on their own. She's had lots of costs. That's why we have the GoFundMe, because she's a single mom and needs to take care of feeding her kids when she can't be there to cook, and cleaning her house when she can't get out of bed, and had to move them to a different private school. But she's had her kids in 3 different private schools in the last 1 year, I would say. So we've seen some of these costs for private schools that real people are using for kids, and we see how very affordable it is, contrary to what people like to try to pretend it is going to be. Of course, you can cherry pick. You can go to San Juan del Sur and pick the most expensive schools and find some pretty high costs. Not super high, but reasonably high cost. And that does exist. But you can also go all over the country and find very good options for very low cost if you're not trying to contrive a scenario where you're going to spend lots of money. So healthcare is one of those areas where everyone's different. Some people are going to pay for insurance, and it's going to easily cost as much as what we've been paying out of pocket for major issues. Some people are going to have lots of issues, and it's going to cost more. But for an average family of 4 where your children are still at home and young, I think you're going to find that you should budget enough to have a lot of emergency set aside as a buffer. That's one of the great ways to do it. Of course, it's good to have credit cards and be ready and be prepared to use the public system as a fallback to make sure you keep your family protected. But you have these protections; they are there. And in real world, I don't know anyone who's spending large amounts. Even with many of the expats that are here are retired, so they're in an age, and many of them are retired vets who have a lot of commonly medical conditions, right? They get pushed very hard in the military and their bodies start to give out when they're in retirement ages or before. And so many of them are here. Many of them are seeing doctors and doing a lot of medical, and the amount that they're spending is quite low. I don't know any who are really hitting that $100 per month to pay out of pocket for all of their medical. And some are getting a lot of care that they were not able to get in the United States. So this isn't just getting by medical. This is in some cases coming here to get medical that the United States was not able to provide to them over a decade or so, right? So now that's an extreme case, but there's been multiple people that we've talked to who have come here and paid out of pocket at the numbers we're talking about and gotten care that no amount of money was able to provide them in the United States. So those are important anecdotes. Those are important studies in what the pricing really does seem like. So in all of this budget, with a family of 4, should you be setting aside $100 a month every month, even if you don't use it, so you have some safety? Absolutely. I think that's a great way to go. But should you expect to be spending that much on medical? No, I don't think you should. As a family of 5, where almost all, meaning probably above 60 or 70% of all of our family budget for medical related issues is all the one person who's in retirement ages and has major medical issues. Everyone else together, we're probably in the $30 to $40 per month over 4 years maximum, if we're even hitting that. It's very, very rare for us to come close to that. And I'm including dental. That is everything. That's eyeglasses, that's hospital visits, that's accidents, that's, now of course, have we had a major accident? No. Have I broken my foot? Yes. Right? So it's all, right, we have had a number of things, but they're all pretty minor. But we do have braces in there. And so there's, everyone wants to try to come up with ways to make it sound like it's going to be expensive. But if we're in the US, many of these things, right? So let's give some perspective on comfort coming from the US. Now, of course, if we were to say, could you live comfortably for a family of 4 at $3,500 per month in the United States? The answer is just flat no, can't be done. There's no amount of you can't find the right town, you can't do the right thing. That's not an option. It's not possible. Could you survive? Maybe. But could you be comfortable? No, absolutely not. So, coming and looking at the overall comfort, right? On a $3,500 budget here, we have media at home that is better than anything we can get in the United States at any price. We have healthcare here that maybe if we were spending in excess of $1 million a year, we could have better in the United States or approach it, but I don't know. I don't have faith that at $1 million expenditure, I could have actually the quality of care that I can get here at what we're spending. Maybe, but not necessarily. But even with really great insurance, no, you cannot get care like we're getting here. Education. We have the exact same education here that we did in the United States. We didn't change. We kept our education from the United States, and many people do. So this is one where people like to, Philip in this example is really pushing to try to find ways to pretend that you have to spend all this money to be in Nicaragua, and saying that, well, it's because you have kids. He doesn't have kids, so he's saying that there must be these costs for kids. Those don't need to be there. Right. So that's almost everyone we know is at zero cost for education and doing the same thing they were doing in the States. We're not adjusting because we're in Nicaragua. We're just leveraging the advantages in life. Food, we're able to eat great. Could we, for a lot more money, eat as well in the United States? Yes, that is an area where it's a struggle because we get much healthier food here. We don't have all the GMO'd food. We don't have all the extra chemicals. We don't have all the processed food in the same way. Some for sure, but not as much. It's much reduced and it's much cheaper. But with enough money, we could eat really well in the United States. And variety and stuff like that, yes, the United States is way better. So that's a place where we struggle in Nicaragua. But we don't generally consider that a comfort item, but it could be for you. It's important to consider. But overall, we feel that we're eating better in Nicaragua. Is our house as comfortable? This is debatable. The house is very different here. However, there's lots of different houses that we could have here. Right? The variety of style of houses is very high. And getting into that $500 number, you can have any type of house. You can have an old colonial. You can have now not an estate like this. But what's amazing is the person who's questioning the prices is saying that you can't possibly get into anything. And the numbers he's throwing out are so absurd. It's like he's never even been in the region, let alone Nicaragua. You could get good places even in Costa Rica for the prices that he's throwing out, not in Tamarindo, but in lots of Costa Rica, and definitely in Panama. So where he thinks you can't do it in the cheapest place in Nicaragua is crazy. But for $500, if you're willing to shop around, you can be in any city in the country, including San Juan del Sur. You can have multiple bedrooms, you can have pools, you can have nice things, you can have American style, you can have colonial style, you can have quirky things. You could build your own without too much of an effort. You've got variety and options, not unlimited options, but way more than you're going to believe. And with those options, the one thing that I do find personally is that I love carpeting. And basically you will never find carpeted homes here. And that is a single point of comfort that is a big deal for me. And you should not put one in. It just makes no sense here for so many reasons. But other than that, I find that the homes we can get here, even at a sixth of the price, at $500, the homes that we saw in Fatima are vastly superior. So much more comfortable, so much more beautiful, new, modern, well-equipped, just great to use with great light, so much better than the home that we had in Texas, even a decade ago at many times that price. Right? When we rented it out, the last time was $1,600 a month. What we can get here for $500. Now you can't get it for $1,600. Now it would be like $2,500. So it's like 1/5, 20% the price for a place in Nicaragua, here in Leon, or nearly anywhere in the country, for unbelievably cheap, right? Or for unbelievable comfort. Sorry, it is unbelievably cheap for better comfort, a bigger yard, a more beautiful yard, a more beautiful house, a much better community, better sidewalk. Although a lot of that stuff was nice in Texas. I'm not knocking the place I had in Texas. It's one of my favorite places in the US. I had a great place in Texas. But what I could move up to here with less is so extreme. People really don't understand, because what I think happens, and this is something that you need to be aware of, many people come down here and don't want it to be the great deal that it is. And so they're really looking at enclave living, or they're put on blinders, just like the person who said he had his wife was trapped here, which of course isn't the case, and said it cost $3,000 a month for a Nicaraguan to live when the average is $300 a month, right? All kinds of crazy things. That's what we're seeing here. And where can these things come from? Sure, someone could just be lying. Right, that's an option. Obviously, they've never seen the country. They just don't like the country. They have some vendetta, and so they're just posting crap and making things up, which is totally viable because they don't realize what's plausible. That's the thing. What Philip is saying here doesn't make any sense. Like, he says he's visited the country many times, but I don't know how anyone could have visited the country and have such a skewed view of how much it costs. Like, it's not even close. He's out of the ballpark. He can't have been to Honduras or El Salvador or Guatemala or Panama. Maybe Costa Rica could have given him an isolated enough view that maybe this would have been reasonable to think. But for people who are being honest, and maybe he is, the thing that we think normally happens is people fly into the country. They don't want anything to do with Nicaraguan lifestyle, so they go out of their way to avoid it. So they look for a Hilton, a Hyatt, the Intercontinental Hotel, which are massive price premiums here. Still cheaper than the US in most cases, so it feels like, oh, look, it's a little bit cheaper, but it's too expensive. You can't actually afford to live in a hotel like that. Of course, could you afford to live in the United States? No, of course not. So it's a false comparison. But they come down and they look at those. Instead of looking at local hotels and local very nice places, like the ones that we showed just recently on the trip to Managua video, we were spending I think we spent $60 a night for 3 people, but we can stay at places like the Cuban Dance for $30 a night or less and be very comfortable, very nice places right in Managua. So they're avoiding those places, I assume, and then they take expensive private shuttles or just hire a taxi driver or rent a car, do something super premium, and have them take them straight to San Juan del Sur, where they go straight into a pre-selected super expensive enclave and surround themselves with people who are spending lots of money, and they all talk about how expensive it is because that's what they're doing. They're creating a situation where it's very expensive, and they isolate themselves and never find out anything about the country. And everything he questions seems to fit that. He's unaware of what cell phones cost or the impression that he gives. He acts like cell phones are going to be a noticeable cost, that internet service is going to be a noticeable cost. And it is in San Juan del Sur. It can be difficult to get that. And if you're in an enclave, many of the enclaves bar Nicaraguan services from coming in. Not all, some are great, but some bar those services and charge you for something really terrible, and they charge you an arm and a leg because you're a captive audience. You foolishly didn't do your research. Now you're trapped. They can charge you whatever they want, and they're making profit off of that because they're not making profits off of selling homes because people aren't buying them. So there's a lot of things like that that can be very misleading, and you could feel like a lot of these things are quite expensive because you've isolated yourself away and are unaware of the knowledge that the people who live just 100 feet outside of your walls are doing every day. You don't know what their meals cost, you don't know what their internet costs, you don't know what their electric costs, and you don't know what they're doing to make those things so cheap. And so you imagine that because you can't afford them, that they must be living in terrible conditions, and in some cases they are, obviously. But you're imagining that they can't have comfort at a reasonable price because you've created a scenario where, one, you're demanding comforts that don't really make sense. For example, the demanding that you use a private school to say that, like, claiming that all the cities that people live in are not the real cities, and there's these secret expensive places you have to live. Of course, they're starting to create this framework of this fanciful world that does not reflect the Nicaragua you find if you fly in, get off the plane, and actually go look at Nicaraguan neighborhoods, go stay at Nicaraguan hotels, go eat at Nicaraguan restaurants, go to Nicaraguan schools, or just do the logical things that have options. Sure, if you have loads of money, there's lots of things that you may spend money on without thinking twice, and then not realize that should you need to cut back, that those are areas you could really easily cut back on. You don't need to, so why would you? And that's a really common thing. If you have a budget of $10,000 or $20,000 per month and you want to send your kids to the best possible private school and it costs, let's say, $1,000 per kid per month, you may never even question that money. It's the best. Why would I spend any amount less, even if it was 90% less, to send them to a place that's only 90% as good? You may not think about that at all. Just the best, no question. And that makes sense. That's a good financial decision for a lot of parents in that position. And so it may seem like things are expensive because you're willing to pay for premiums because premiums are available to you that you're not used to. And like he said, in this example, Philip jumped to one of the things he required for price when considering comfort was to have a maid. I think this one thing gives away what his impression is of comfort more than anything else. He's requiring to qualify, now he doesn't say this specifically, but he demands it in his list of things he wants priced out, that you must price having a maid. Now, I don't know anyone who was rich enough in the United States, and I worked on Wall Street, right? I was an executive on Wall Street for most of my career, and I never knew someone who had a full-time maid, ever. I knew extremely few people who had a maid of any sort, ever. Maybe, once a year someone comes in and does a deep clean, sure. But of people who actually had maids, the only people I've ever known personally who did that were people who owned the companies and the maid worked for them and they would stop by and quickly clean their house as part of a larger set of things. And they only did it when they had extra time. They never did it on a regular schedule. That is the only time. This is not a comfort that normal North Americans can afford. So to include it here, he's considering a level of comfort that is far out of reach of what normal people would ever consider comfort in North America. I'm not saying we shouldn't include it here, and I did include it because it's very affordable and may make sense even on this budget. But that's what I want you to consider. The budget that we've been given at $3,500 per month is enough that we are seriously discussing whether or not you will have a full-time person to cook and clean and shop for you so that you have so much spare time to be able to go and do your life without having to worry about those things. Consider what number of comforts it takes before that is something that you add into your comforts. Not only is $3,500 enough to be comfortable, in Nicaragua, $3,500 is enough to be absurdly comfortable. And it is Philip who pointed this out. I wouldn't have realized just how much luxury this number would really account for until he pointed out that he just assumed you would have to have private schools that you paid for and private healthcare that you paid for and a full-time maid that works for you and all these things. And yeah, you probably would at that budget, but not because you have to, because you have so much money and you're so comfortable. So thanks especially to Quality Content QC who asked the initial question. Hopefully we did provide a really good feedback for you and certainly ask more questions. And Philip said he would buy lots of coffees if I actually came through and did this breakdown. But I had loads of people from all over the country, Grenada, Managua, San Juan del Sur, and others, all jump in and point out what they were spending currently and how $3,500 was totally enough budget for a family of four in their scenarios, in their towns to live. So I don't know where Philip has been that he could make the argument that it's expensive like this, but it's none of those places because the people who are actually there right now have verified that it is potentially affordable. Also easy to spend more, but definitely you can spend less. Thank you so much for joining me. Like and subscribe. If you would like to help support this channel, you can buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/Scott Allen Miller. And Philip, you definitely owe me some coffees on this one. Put in the effort at your request. You can also join the channel. We have a join button right down there that is just $5 per month. You don't get anything special except for that warm and fuzzy of every month supporting the channel and helping to make everything that we do here possible, including very soon a video on getting a new car and hopefully a video on some clothes shopping here in Leon, which is not a great place to go clothes shopping. Managua is definitely the place for that if you can. As I mentioned in the video, we have a GoFundMe set up for Marcela, who does have stage 4 Hodgkin's lymphoma. She is doing pretty well. At the time that I'm recording this, we are one day past her 3rd chemo treatment, and at the moment she's feeling pretty well. Tomorrow she will likely hit the wall because that's how long the chemo takes. Like I said, awesome public health care here is taking care of her healthcare costs, but she does have 2 children. She's a single mother, and there's a lot of logistics that go along with needing this amount of medical care and any donations that you guys have for her GoFundMe. And there's a video on the GoFundMe that goes into all the details. It really does make a difference. We appreciate that so much. Every Thursday, we do have a live stream, or we try to do it every Thursday. We have missed a few, but we're pretty good about it. It would be awesome if you guys jumped on there. And questions like this, where we dig into budgets and you can ask questions about individual costs rather than a whole budget, it is fantastic. We love going into that stuff, and we just love everybody getting on and hanging out. And of course, we have that WhatsApp group where you could talk to people in real time and ask them what they're paying in rent, and you'll be shocked by how shocked every single person is that Philip thought $500 wouldn't get them a place when nearly every person in the group thought they were living comfortably and weren't spending $500 and were confused, including a family of 6 at $450 in a very high-end luxury gated community. And I'm also really shocked that Fatima, which all of us consider one of the most luxurious places around, he thinks isn't going to cut it. If that's the case, where in the world does cut it? Because that's pretty luxurious. Check out our videos on Residencia Fatima and some of those houses for around $500 that we did kind of recently. I think they're pretty informative. Anyway, it's been a long video today. I really appreciate the topic being sent in. It makes a big difference having these things to go over. I will see all of you tomorrow.